They told her to let him die. They told her that if she touched the boy, she would bring the wrath of the entire territory down on her head. But Clara Thorne didn't care about politics, and she didn't care about the hatred of her neighbors. She only saw a child freezing to death in the mud. What she didn't know was that this wasn't just any child. This was the only son of the most feared warrior in the Montana Territory. And when that warrior saw a white woman standing between his son and a loaded gun, he didn't declare war. He did something that would shock the history books. This is the true-to-life story of the woman who saved a starving heir and the proposal that changed the Wild West forever. The winter of 1884 in the Montana Territory was not merely cold. It was a living, breathing malice. The wind didn't just blow. It stripped the skin from your face and the hope from your bones. In the settlement of Blackwood Creek, survival was the only religion that mattered. Clara Thorne knew this better than anyone. At 28, she was already a relic in the eyes of the town. A widow who had refused to remarry, she managed her late husband's failing timber plot on the very edge of the civilized boundary. The townspeople whispered about her. They called her Stoneheart Thorne because she rarely smiled. But the truth was, she simply had nothing left to smile about. Her husband, Elias, had died 3 years prior in a logging accident, leaving her with debt and a small cabin that shuddered every time the northern gales screamed down from the mountains. It was a Tuesday, late in November, when the temperature dropped so low that the sap froze inside the trees, causing them to crack like rifle shots in the silence of the forest. Clara was down by the creek, the invisible line that separated Blackwood Creek from the river tribe's territory, breaking the ice to fetch water. Her breath plumed in gray clouds before her. Her hands, wrapped in rough wool, ached with a deep, thrumming pain. She raised her axe to strike the ice again when she saw it. A bundle. It was caught in the reeds on the far bank, half submerged in the freezing slush. It looked like a discard pile of rags, perhaps an old blanket washed downstream. But then, the rags moved. Clara froze. The stories of the river tribe were told in hushed, fearful tones in Blackwood. Mayor Silas Vane, a man whose greed was only matched by his girth, had spent the last 2 years whipping the town into a frenzy of hatred against them. He claimed they were savages, thieves who would slit a throat as soon as look at you. Clara didn't see a savage. She saw a movement too small to be a threat. Abandoning her water buckets, she hitched up her heavy skirts and waded into the creek. The water was agony. It felt like 1,000 needles piercing her legs, soaking through her boots instantly. She gasped, stumbling over slick rocks, fighting the current that tried to drag her down. When she reached the reeds, her heart stopped. It was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old. His skin, usually a warm copper, was tinged with a terrifying blue. He wore a deerskin tunic that was soaked through and stiff with ice. His black hair was matted against his forehead, and his eyes were closed. He was so still, Clara thought she was too late. "Hey," she choked out, her teeth chattering. "Little one?" She reached out and touched his cheek. It was like touching marble. But then, a faint, shallow gasp escaped his lips. He was alive, but only just. Clara didn't think. She didn't consider the treaty lines. She didn't consider Mayor Vane's decree that aiding the enemy is treason. She scooped the child up. He was frighteningly light, his body ravaged by what must have been weeks of food scarcity before the cold took him. She clutched him to her chest, trying to share her body heat, and scrambled back across the creek. Her legs were numb, heavy logs that she had to force to move. She slipped on the bank, scraping her knees raw, but she didn't let go of the boy. She made it to the tree line just as a horse whinnied nearby. Clara looked up, panting, steam rising from her wet dress. Blocking her path to her cabin sat 3 men on horseback. In the center was Mayor Silas Vane. He wore a thick bear fur coat and a hat that cost more than Clara's farm earned in a decade. Flanking him were his 2 deputies, hired guns named Pike and Grady. Vane looked down at her, his eyes narrowing as they landed on the bundle in her arms. "Well now, Mrs. Thorne," Vane drawled, his voice oily and smooth. "Looks like you've been doing some fishing, but I don't think that's a trout." "Get out of my way, Silas," Clara said, her voice shaking from the cold. "He's freezing." "That," Vane pointed a gloved finger, "is a river rat, probably a scout. They send the small ones to count our numbers." "He is 6 years old," Clara screamed, the wind whipping her hair across her face. "He is dying." "Let nature take its course," Vane said, his face hardening. "You bring that thing into this town. You bring their war to our doorstep. Drop it, Clara. Throw it back in the creek. It's a mercy." Pike, the man on the left, rested his hand on his revolver. The threat was clear. Clara looked at the boy in her arms. He let out a small whimper, a sound of pure, instinctual pain. Something inside Clara, something that had been dormant since Elias died, snapped awake. It was a ferocity she didn't know she possessed. "No," she said. Vane blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Clara stepped forward, her eyes locking with Vane's. "You want to kill this child? You'll have to shoot me in the back while I walk away. And I don't think even you are stupid enough to shoot a white woman in broad daylight, Silas. Not with the election coming up." It was a gamble. A massive one. Vane's jaw tightened, his face flushing red. He hated defiance, especially from women, and especially from Clara Thorne. "You cross me, Clara," Vane hissed, leaning over his saddle horn, "and you'll find this winter very long and very lonely. No one will sell to you. No one will buy your wood. You'll starve right alongside that savage." "I've been starving since Elias died, Silas," Clara spat back. "I'm used to it." She pushed past the horses. She expected a bullet. She expected the crack of a whip. But the silence held, broken only by the wind. She didn't look back. She marched to her cabin, kicked the door open, and slammed it shut, sliding the heavy oak bolt into place. Only then did her legs give out. She slid to the floor, the icy child in her arms, and wept. The cabin was freezing. Clara couldn't afford to weep for long. Every second she wasted was a second the frost claimed more of the boy's life. She laid him on the rug before the hearth. The embers of the morning fire were dead, so she went to work with frantic desperation. She shaved kindling, her hands shaking so badly she nearly sliced her thumb. When the first flame licked up the dry wood, she fed it the best logs she had, the ones she had been saving for the deep freeze of January. Today, January didn't matter. Only now mattered. She stripped the boy of his frozen tunic. His ribs showed through his skin like the rungs of a ladder. He was covered in old scars and fresh scratches. Clara took her own wool blanket, heated it near the fire, and wrapped him tight. She spent the next 6 hours fighting for his life. She rubbed his hands and feet to bring back circulation, wincing at the blue bruises that bloomed on his skin. Frostbite. She heated water and mixed in a little of her precious sugar, trying to spoon the warm liquid between his lips. For hours, he didn't stir. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the world into a heavy, menacing darkness. Around midnight, the wind changed. It brought the sound of shouting. Clara went to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. Down the hill, near the main road of Blackwood Creek, she saw torches. Vane wasn't done. He was rallying the town. She could hear his voice carrying over the snow, shouting about spies and security. She gripped the window ledge. She had no gun. Elias's rifle had been sold to pay for his coffin. She had a wood axe and a carving knife. A soft noise behind her made her spin around. The boy. His eyes were open. They were dark, darker than the night outside, and filled with a terrified confusion. He scrambled backward, pressing himself against the rough stones of the fireplace, his breathing ragged. "It's all right," Clara whispered, raising her hands. "I'm not going to hurt you." The boy stared at her. He clearly didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. He looked at the fire, then down at the warm wool blanket, then back at Clara. "Elu," he rasped. His voice was like gravel. "Elu," Clara repeated. She pointed to him. "Your name is Elu?" He nodded weakly. "Elu." Then he pointed to the door and whispered a word Clara didn't know, but the fear in his eyes translated it perfectly. "Danger." "Yes," Clara said grimly. "Danger." She went to the pantry and brought him a piece of stale bread softened in warm milk. He ate it with a ferocity that broke her heart, his small hands shaking. "Who are you, Elu?" she wondered aloud. "Where is your family?" As if answering her question, the boy touched a necklace hidden beneath the blanket. Clara hadn't noticed it before. It was a leather cord strung with a single large wolf's tooth, carved with intricate symbols and capped in silver. Clara gasped. She knew enough about the river tribe to know that silver wasn't common among the lower ranks. And a wolf tooth. That was the sign of the chieftains. "You're not just a scout," she whispered. "You're someone important." A heavy thud against her front door made them both jump. Elu let out a sharp cry and curled into a ball. "Clara Thorne!" It was Vane's voice. He wasn't alone. The murmur of a crowd was behind him. "Open this door, Clara!" Vane bellowed. "We know you have him. The town council has voted. We are removing the threat." "He is a child," Clara screamed back through the timber. "Go home, Silas." "He is a spark that will burn this town down," Vane shouted. "We found tracks near the ridge. Riders. River tribe riders. They are looking for him. If they find him here, they will kill us all. We need to give him to the marshals before the tribe gets here." "You mean you want to use him as leverage?" Clara accused. She knew Vane. He didn't want to give the boy to the marshals. He wanted to ransom him or kill him to provoke a war that would clear the land for his railroad deals. "I'm giving you to the count of 3, Clara. Then we break the door down." Clara looked at Elu. The boy was trembling, his eyes wide. He held the wolf tooth so tight his knuckles were white. Clara grabbed the wood axe from the corner. She dragged the heavy kitchen table in front of the door. "One!" Vane shouted. Clara stood before the boy, the axe heavy in her hands. She was a farmer's wife, not a soldier. She was terrified, but looking at Elu, she felt a strange calm. If this was how she ended, protecting a child from monsters in human skin, then it was a good end. 2. The sound of a heavy log ramming against the door splintered the wood. The bolt groaned. Dust fell from the ceiling. Elu closed his eyes, and began to chant a high, thin song, a death song. Vane's count was cut off, not by silence, but by a sound that vibrated through the floorboards, a sound that Clara felt in her teeth. It was the sound of 200 horses thundering out of the tree line. Then came the war cry. It wasn't a human sound. It was the screech of a predator. Outside, the mob's shouting turned into screams of terror. "They're here! Oh God, they're here!" someone shrieked. Clara heard the sound of boots running, slipping on ice. She heard Vane shouting for order, followed by the deafening crack of a warning shot, not from a revolver, but from a repeating Winchester rifle. Then silence. Absolute, terrifying silence. Clara lowered the axe. She turned to Elu. The boy had stopped chanting. He was looking at the door, a faint smile touching his lips. "8," he whispered. "Father." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She moved the table. With trembling hands, she slid back the damaged bolt. She opened the door to the night. The torches of the townspeople had been dropped in the snow, casting long, dancing shadows. Vane and his men were there, but they were on their knees, their hands raised. Surrounding the cabin, forming a perfect semicircle of steel and muscle, were 50 warriors on horseback. Their breath misted in the air. They were painted for war, streaks of red and black across their faces. And in the center, on a massive black stallion, sat a man who looked like the mountain itself carved into flesh. He wore a buffalo robe and a headdress of eagle feathers that trailed down the side of his horse. His face was hard, angular, and terrifyingly beautiful. He held a Winchester rifle in one hand, resting it easily on his thigh. His eyes, black as obsidian, scanned the terrified townspeople before landing on Clara. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, then at the open door. Clara stepped out into the cold. She didn't raise her hands. She simply turned back and gestured for Elu. The boy stumbled out, wrapped in Clara's blanket. When the chief saw the boy, the mask of stone cracked. For a fraction of a second, raw relief flooded his face. "Matto!" Elu cried out, running through the snow. The chief slid from his horse with a grace that belied his size. He dropped to one knee, catching the boy as he collided with his chest. He buried his face in the boy's neck, saying something in his native tongue, his voice thick with emotion. The warriors lowered their weapons slightly, the tension breaking. But Silas Vane, seeing the distraction, saw an opportunity. He was a man whose ego could not handle the humiliation of kneeling before a savage. Slowly, carefully, he reached for the derringer hidden in his boot. Clara saw the movement. "Look out!" she screamed. She didn't think. She threw herself forward, not at Vane, but in front of the chief and his son. Vane fired. The gunshot echoed off the frozen trees like a crack of thunder, rolling down the valley and settling into a ringing silence. Clara felt the impact before she heard the sound. It felt like a sledgehammer had slammed into her left shoulder. The force of it spun her around, and the snowy ground rushed up to meet her. She hit the ice hard, the air leaving her lungs in a gasp that tasted of copper. "Clara!" The scream didn't come from the townspeople. It came from Elu. For a heartbeat, the world was still. Silas Vane stood with the smoking derringer in his hand, his eyes wide. He hadn't meant to hit her. He had aimed for the chief. But Clara's sudden movement had changed history. Then, the stillness shattered. Chief Matto moved faster than a man of his size should have been able to. He didn't reach for his rifle. He didn't reach for his knife. He launched himself across the snow, a blur of buffalo fur and righteous fury. Vane tried to cock the hammer for a second shot, but he was too slow. Maddow collided with him, the impact lifting the fat mare off his feet. They crashed into the snow, and the sound of a breaking bone, Vane's wrist, sickened the air. Vane shrieked, a high, womanly sound, dropping the gun. Maddow didn't kill him. Death would have been too easy. Instead, the chief gripped Vane by the throat and hauled him up, pinning him against the side of Clara's cabin. Vane's feet dangled 6 inches off the ground, his face turning a mottled purple. The 50 warriors on horseback raised their rifles. Every hammer clicked back in unison. The sound was like a mechanical wave of death. The townspeople, Pike, Grady, and the rest of the mob, dropped their weapons instantly, falling to their knees in the slush. "Don't shoot!" Pike screamed, throwing his hands up. "We surrender! Don't shoot!" Maddow ignored them. He stared into Vane's bulging eyes. "You shoot at a child," Maddow growled, his voice a low rumble that carried across the yard. To the shock of everyone, he spoke in English, accented, but clear and sharp as a blade. "You shoot at a woman. You are not a man. You are a rabid dog." Maddow tightened his grip. Vane clawed at the chief's heavy gloves, his eyes rolling back. "8! Father!" Elu's voice cut through the red haze of the chief's rage. Maddow froze. He looked down. Elu was kneeling beside Clara, pressing his small hands against her shoulder. Blood was seeping through her gray wool dress, staining the snow beneath her bright crimson. Maddow looked at Vane one last time, disgusted, and threw him to the ground like a sack of trash. Vane landed hard, gasping and wheezing, clutching his broken wrist. "If she dies," Maddow announced to the terrifyingly silent crowd, "Blackwood Creek dies with her. Every house, every store, burned to ash." He turned his back on the armed men, the ultimate insult, and knelt beside Clara. Clara was conscious, but her vision was tunneling. The pain was a white-hot poker in her shoulder. She looked up to see the face of the warrior she had just saved. Up close, he was terrifyingly handsome, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that held the weight of 1,000 winters. A long scar ran down his jawline. "Why?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle as he examined the wound. "Why take the bullet, white woman?" "He is a child," Clara gritted out, her teeth clenched against the pain. "It wasn't his war." Maddow's expression shifted. The hardness in his eyes cracked, revealing a profound respect. He nodded once, sharply. He barked a command in his native tongue. 2 warriors immediately dismounted, rushing forward with a stretcher made of buffalo hide. "Take her to the town doctor," one of the townswomen yelled hysterically from the crowd. "She needs Doc Halloway." Maddow looked at the woman with cold disdain. "Your doctor treats horses and drunks. My healers treat warriors." He scooped Clara up in his arms. She was shocked by how easily he held her, as if she weighed no more than a dry branch. He carried her not to his horse, but back into her own cabin. "Secure the perimeter," Maddow ordered, his second in command, a scarred warrior named Red Hawk. "No one enters. No one leaves. This land is now River Tribe soil." As the door kicked shut, shutting out the cold and the crying mare, Clara felt a strange sensation wash over her before the darkness took her. It wasn't fear. For the first time since Elias died, she felt safe. The fever took her for 3 days. Clara floated in a haze of heat and pain. She had dreams of fire and ice. She dreamed of Elias, standing at the edge of the woods, shaking his head sadly. She dreamed of the wolf with the silver tooth, guarding the foot of her bed. When she finally woke, the silence of the cabin was absolute. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The storm had passed. Harsh winter sunlight streamed through the cracks in the shutters. She tried to move and hissed in pain. Her left shoulder was bound tightly in clean linen, smelling strongly of sage and a pungent, earthy poultice. Do not move. The lead passed through, but the muscle is angry. Clara turned her head. Sitting in a rocking chair, Elias's old chair, was Chief Matto. He wasn't wearing his war paint anymore. His face was clean, revealing the bronze skin and the deep lines of leadership etched around his mouth. He wore a simple buckskin shirt and trousers, but the air of authority was unchanged. He was whittling a piece of wood with a long, bone-handled knife. "You." Clara's voice was a dry croak. Matto stood up and brought a tin cup to her lips. "Drink. Willow bark tea. It helps the pain." Clara drank greedily. The liquid was bitter, but soothing. She sank back into the pillows. "How long?" "3 suns," Matto said, sitting back down. "My healers extracted the fragments. You are strong, Clara Thorne, stronger than the men of your village. You know my name? I make it my business to know the names of my enemies," Matto said calmly, "and my allies, though I admit I did not expect to find an ally in this house." Clara looked around. The cabin was warm, warmer than it had been in years. A massive stack of firewood was piled near the hearth. On her table sat sacks of flour, dried venison, and coffee. "Where is Elu?" she asked. "He is outside, guarding your chickens from a fox." Matto's lips twitched with the ghost of a smile. "He believes he owes you a life debt. He takes his duties seriously." Clara closed her eyes. "You shouldn't be here, Chief. Vane, he will bring the U.S. Marshals. They'll say you're occupying my land." "Let them come," Matto said, his voice darkening. "Let them see that I am nursing the woman their mayor shot. Let the Marshals see who the savages really are." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The intensity of his gaze made Clara flush. "You saved my son. Elu is the last of my blood. My wife. The fever took her 2 winters ago. Elu is all I have. When he wandered off during the hunt, I thought the spirits had taken him too. You gave him back to me." "I did what anyone would do," Clara whispered. "No." Matto shook his head firmly. "I watched your people. 50 of them stood there and watched Vane raise his gun. Only you moved. That is not anyone. That is spirit." He stood up and paced the small room. He seemed too big for the cabin, a wild force confined in a wooden box. "I cannot pay you in gold, Clara Thorne. The treaties have left us with little coin. But I have learned that in your world, a woman alone is prey. Vane hates you. He hates you because you defied him, and now he hates you because you exposed his cowardice. When I leave, he will destroy you. He will burn this cabin. He will ensure you starve." Clara knew he was right. A cold dread settled in her stomach. "I know. I will sell the land. Move east." "No," Matto said sharply. "You will not run. You have earned your place here." He stopped pacing and stood at the foot of her bed. He looked her in the eye, his expression unreadable. "There is a way to stop Vane, a way to keep your land." "How?" "The Treaty of 1881, Matto recited, sounding like a lawyer. "It states that any land belonging to a member of the river tribe or their immediate family is under federal protection. The local mayor has no jurisdiction. He cannot tax it. He cannot seize it. He cannot step foot on it without a federal warrant." Clara was confused. "But I am not river tribe." Matto took a deep breath. He looked at the door, then back at her. "I am a chief. My word is law among my people. and under the old laws, if a warrior owes a life debt that cannot be repaid, he may offer a union of protection. He paused, his dark eyes locking onto hers. I am offering you marriage, Clara Thorne. Clara's jaw dropped. The silence in the room was deafening. Marriage, she squeaked. It would be a marriage of paper and law, Maddow said quickly, raising a hand. I do not ask for your bed. I do not ask for your heart. I ask for your name. If you are my wife, this cabin becomes tribal land. Vane cannot touch you. The marshals cannot touch you. You would have the protection of 300 warriors. You would never chop your own wood again. You would never starve. Clara stared at him. It was insanity. A white woman marrying a tribal chief in 1884? It was social suicide. It was dangerous. But then she remembered the cold. She remembered the empty pantry. She remembered Silas Vane's oily smile as he told her to let the boy die. And what do you get out of it, Chief? She asked softly. Why would you chain yourself to a white widow? Maddow walked to the window, looking out at his son playing in the snow. Because my son needs a mother, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. And I have seen how he looks at you. And perhaps because I am tired of fighting alone. He turned back to her, extending his hand. It was large, calloused, and steady. The town is gathering at the church, Maddow said. Vane is telling them I am holding you hostage. He is rallying a posse to storm the cabin. If we walk out that door as strangers, there will be blood. If we walk out as betrothed, it changes the game. Clara looked at his hand. She looked at the scar on his jaw. She thought of the lonely years since Elias died. She thought of the fire in her heart when she stood in front of that gun. She took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in her shoulder. Help me up, Clara said. You are too weak to walk, Maddow frowned. If I am to be the wife of a chief, Clara said, a spark of defiance returning to her eyes, I will not be carried out like an invalid. I will walk. Maddow smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, one that transformed his face from frightening to devastatingly handsome. Good, he said. He grasped her hand and pulled her gently to her feet. Then let us go and shock the world, Clara. The door to the cabin opened slowly. Outside, the tension was so thick it felt like the air before a lightning strike. Silas Vane had rallied nearly 80 men this time. They weren't just townspeople with pitchforks. He had deputized the drunkards from the saloon and armed them with shotgun stubbies. They stood in a ragged line behind the stone wall of the garden, weapons trained on the door. On the perimeter, the 50 River Tribe warriors sat motionless on their horses, their rifles resting easy but ready. They were outnumbered now, but they had the high ground and the discipline of veterans. Vane stood at the front, his broken wrist in a sling, his face pale and sweaty. Listen to me, Vane shouted at the closed door, playing to the crowd. We are not here to kill the woman. We are here to rescue her. That savage has held her for 3 days. He is using her as a shield. The crowd murmured in agreement. It was a story they wanted to believe because it made them heroes, not murderers. Then, Clara stepped out. She didn't look like a hostage. She wore her best Sunday dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out the pale determination in her face. Her left arm was in a sling made of deerskin, but she stood tall. Beside her, looming like a shadow, was Chief Maddow, and holding Clara's good hand was Elu. The crowd fell silent. The image didn't match Vane's story. There was no gun to her head. There was no fear in her eyes. Clara, Vane shouted, stepping forward. Run to us. We'll cover you. Just get away from him." Clara looked at Vane. Then she looked at the townspeople, neighbors she had known for 10 years. The baker who sold her stale bread at full price. The blacksmith who refused to shoe her horse on credit. "I am not going anywhere, Silas," Clara's voice rang out, clear and cold. Vane blinked. "What?" "Clara, you're in shock. He's brainwashed you." "He saved me," Clara corrected him. "He saved me after you shot me." "That was an accident." Vane sputtered, his face reddening. "I was trying to protect the town." "Now get down here, woman, before I order my men to open fire and cut that savage down." Maddow stepped forward. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice was a deep baritone that carried effortless authority. "If you fire," Maddow said, "you fire on my wife." A gasp rippled through the crowd. The men lowered their guns slightly, looking at each other in confusion. "Wife?" Vane laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "You lie. You can't marry a white woman. It's illegal. It's against nature." "It is a union of souls," Maddow said. "And by the sunrise tomorrow, it will be a union of law. We travel to the federal magistrate in Helena tonight." Maddow reached into his belt and pulled out a rolled parchment. He held it up. "This land," Maddow declared, gesturing to Clara's property, "is now the dowry of the bride. It is under the protection of the River Tribe. And under the Treaty of 1881, Article 4, any aggression against tribal family on tribal land is an act of war against the federal government." He stared directly at the deputies behind Vane. "If you shoot us," Maddow said calmly, "you do not just fight Indians. You fight the United States Army. You will all hang for treason." The effect was instantaneous. The deputies, men who were only in it for the money and the bullying, suddenly looked terrified. No one wanted to hang. One by one, they lowered their shotguns. "Don't listen to him," Vane shrieked, spinning around to face his men. "He's bluffing. It's a trick. Shoot him. I pay your wages, damn it." "I ain't hanging for you, Silas," the blacksmith muttered, uncocking his rifle and walking away. "Me neither," said another. The mob began to dissolve. It started as a trickle and became a flood. The townspeople, realizing they were on the wrong side of both morality and the law, turned their backs on the mayor. They shuffled away through the snow, heads down, avoiding Clara's gaze. Within 5 minutes, Silas Vane stood alone in the snow. He looked at the retreating crowd, then back at Clara and Maddow. His face twisted into a mask of pure, concentrated hatred. "This isn't over," Vane whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "You think a piece of paper protects you? You think playing house with a savage makes you safe? I will burn you out, Clara. I will burn this whole mountain down." "Get off my land, Silas," Clara said softly, "before my husband loses his temper." Maddow took a single step forward, his hand dropping to the handle of his knife. Vane scrambled back, nearly tripping over his own boots. He managed to mount his horse with one hand, jerking the reins violently. He galloped away, disappearing into the tree line of Blackwood Creek. Clara watched him go. Her knees felt like water. She swayed, and immediately Maddow's arm was there, supporting her. "You did well," he murmured. Clara looked up at him. "He won't stop. I know him. He's a man who would rather see the world burn than lose an argument." "Then let him try," Maddow said, looking toward the dark forest. "He plays with laws and lies. I play with fire and steel. Come, we have a wedding to attend." The ceremony took place 3 days later, not in a church, but in the grove of ancient pines behind the cabin. It was a collision of two worlds. a circuit judge from Helena, a man named Judge Calloway, who owed Maddow a favor from the Indian Wars, officiated the legal proceedings to ensure the paperwork was ironclad. But the soul of the wedding was River Tribe. Clara wore her blue dress, but over it, the tribe women had draped a shawl of white buffalo wool, embroidered with beads that told the story of a woman protecting a cub. Maddow wore his ceremonial leathers, but on his vest he had pinned a small brooch that had belonged to Elias, a gesture of respect to the man who came before him. There were no guests from the town. Only the warriors and their families stood witness. "Do you, Clara Thorne, take this man for the sake of peace and protection?" Judge Calloway asked, adjusting his spectacles. Clara looked at Maddow. In the last 3 days, he had chopped her wood, fixed her roof, and taught Elu how to track rabbits in the garden. He had been respectful, sleeping on the floor by the hearth while she took the bed. He was a man of honor in a land that had forgotten what the word meant. "I do," she said. And to her surprise, she realized she wasn't just saying it for the treaty. She felt safe with him. "And do you, Chief Maddow?" Maddow looked at her. His eyes were intense, stripping away her defenses. "I take her. Her enemies are my enemies. Her home is my home." When the judge pronounced them man and wife, there was no kiss. Maddow simply took her hand and pressed his forehead against hers, a tribal gesture of shared breath and shared life. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me yet," he replied quietly. "The winter is just beginning." For 2 weeks, peace reigned. But it was the heavy, suffocating peace of a holding breath. The cabin transformed. It became a hybrid fortress. The warriors set up a rotating camp at the edge of the property. Elu thrived, his cheeks filling out, his laughter ringing through the trees. Clara found herself smiling again. She taught Maddow how to read English legal texts. He taught her how to listen to the forest. But Silas Vane was not idle. Vane knew he couldn't use the townspeople anymore. He needed men without consciences. He sent a telegram to Deadwood, to a group of cattle-baron mercenaries known as the Regulators. These were men who specialized in land disputes. They didn't use laws. They used dynamite and long-range rifles. It started with the livestock. Clara woke one morning to find her 3 milk cows dead in the pasture. Their throats hadn't been slit. They had been poisoned. The next day, the creek that fed the cabin ran black. Someone had dumped oil and refuse upstream. "He is testing us," Maddow said, examining the black water. "He wants us to attack the town. If we attack, we break the treaty, and the army comes to kill us." "He's trying to starve us out," Clara said, shivering in the morning wind. "Just like he said." "He cannot starve a hunter," Maddow said, "but he is preparing for something bigger." That night, the snowstorm returned with a vengeance. The wind howled like a banshee, masking all sound. Clara and Maddow were inside the cabin. Elu was asleep in a cot they had built near the fire. Maddow was cleaning his Winchester, the smell of gun oil mixing with the scent of baking bread. Suddenly, the wolf-tooth necklace around Elu's neck began to vibrate against the wood of the cot. The boy woke up with a gasp. "Maddow," Elu whispered. "Listen." Maddow stopped cleaning. He sat perfectly still. At first, Clara heard nothing but the wind. Then she heard it. A soft thump on the roof. Then another. "Get down!" Maddow roared. He tackled Clara, throwing her to the floor and covering her body with his own. Boom! The roof of the cabin exploded. Shards of wood and burning shingles rained down. A stick of dynamite had been dropped down the chimney, but it had snagged on the grate, exploding upward instead of into the room. If it had fallen into the hearth, they would all be dead. The cabin filled with smoke and freezing air. Through the gaping hole in the roof, snow swirled in. "Elu!" Clara screamed, crawling through the debris. The boy was coughing, covered in soot, but unhurt. Matto grabbed him with one arm, and Clara with the other. "The root cellar!" Matto commanded. They scrambled across the floor as gunfire erupted from the tree line. The regulators were here. Bullets chewed through the timber walls, shattering plates and lamps. Matto kicked open the trapdoor to the root cellar, hidden beneath the rug. He shoved Elu and Clara down into the darkness. "Stay here," Matto said, his eyes glowing with a terrifying light. He racked the slide of his Winchester. "Where are you going?" Clara grabbed his ankle. "There's too many of them." "They touched my son," Matto snarled, "and they tried to kill my wife." He pulled free of her grip. "Now, I show them why the army was afraid of me." He slammed the trapdoor shut. Huddled in the dark, holding the trembling child, Clara listened. She expected to hear Matto die. She expected to hear the heavy boots of the mercenaries storming the house. Instead, she heard the war cry. It wasn't the cry of a man. It was the cry of a demon. And then, the screams of the mercenaries began. The battle above the cellar lasted only 12 minutes, but to Clara, it felt like 12 years. Huddled in the dirt, she pressed her hands over Elu's ears. The sounds drifting down were nightmare fuel. The shattering of glass, the wet thud of bodies hitting the floorboards, and the deafening roar of the Winchester. Then silence. It was a cold, heavy silence, broken only by the wind whistling through the destroyed roof. "Matto," Clara whispered. No answer. "Stay here," she commanded Elu, her voice shaking. She pushed the trapdoor up. It was heavy, covered in debris. With a grunt of effort, she shoved it aside and climbed into the ruins of her living room. The cabin was a wreck. Snow swirled in through a gaping hole in the ceiling, mixing with the smoke. Furniture was splintered, but the bodies on the floor were not Matto. 3 men lay prone in the snow-dusted room. They were dressed in expensive dusters, regulators. They hadn't been shot. They had been taken down in hand-to-hand combat. 1 lay by the door, unconscious. 2 were groaning in pain near the hearth. "Clara?" The voice came from the shadows of the kitchen. Matto stepped out. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye, and his left arm hung loosely at his side, but he was alive. In his right hand, he held his knife. "Are you hurt?" Clara rushed to him, checking him frantically. "A graze," he grunted. "The rest ran. Cowards always run when the first blood is not yours." "Where is Vane?" Clara asked, looking around. "He wouldn't have come inside. He's too much of a coward." Matto walked to the shattered door and kicked it open. "He is waiting for his victory." Clara followed him out into the storm. The snow was blinding, but through the white haze, she saw a figure sitting on a horse at the edge of the property line. It was Silas Vane. He was peering through a brass spyglass, waiting to see his mercenaries drag Clara's body out. When he saw Matto step onto the porch, bloodied but standing tall, Vane lowered the glass. Even from this distance, Clara saw his posture collapse. He turned his horse to flee, but he didn't get far. From the tree line on the left, Red Hawk emerged on his pony. From the right, 3 more warriors appeared. Behind Vane, blocking the road to town, the rest of the river tribe materialized from the whiteout like ghosts. Vane was trapped. Matto descended the porch steps. He didn't run. He walked with a slow, terrifying purpose. Clara grabbed her shawl and followed him. Vane's horse was dancing nervously, hemmed in by 50 silent warriors. "Stay back!" Vane screamed, pulling a rifle from his saddle scabbard. "I am the mayor. You touch me, and the governor will send the cavalry." "The cavalry is already here," a voice boomed from the road. The warriors parted. Riding through the line was not a soldier, but Judge Calloway, flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals. Vane's face went white. "Judge, thank God. These savages, they attacked me. They killed my men." Judge Calloway rode up to Vane. He looked at the smoking ruins of the cabin. He looked at the dead cows in the field. He looked at the wounded mercenaries stumbling out of the door, their hands raised in surrender. "We found your telegrams in Deadwood, Silas," Calloway said, his voice dry and bored. "The regulators are not known for their discretion. You hired them to burn a federal protectorate. That's arson, attempted murder, and treason." "It's a lie," Vane shrieked. "It's a setup." Maddow walked up to Vane's horse. He reached up, grabbed Vane's expensive fur coat, and ripped him out of the saddle. Vane hit the snow with a wet crunch. Before he could scramble up, Maddow's boot was on his chest. "I should kill you," Maddow said softly. The tip of his knife hovered inches from Vane's throat. "For the boy, for the woman." "Do it," Vane spat, though his eyes were terrified. "Make me a martyr." Maddow stared at him for a long moment. The rage in his eyes was a forest fire, burning hot and bright. Clara held her breath. If he killed Vane now, even with the judge there, it would be trouble. Then Maddow stepped back. He sheathed his knife. "No," Maddow said. "Death is too quick for a man like you. You love power. You love gold. You will rot in a cage where no one knows your name. You will have nothing." He looked at the marshals. "Take him!" As the marshals shackled Vane, dragging him weeping toward the wagon, the former mayor looked back at Clara. "You're a fool, Clara," he screamed. "You've ruined your life. You're a squaw now. The town will never accept you." Clara stepped forward. She reached down and took Maddow's hand, intertwining her fingers with his in front of everyone. "I didn't lose my life, Silas," she called out. "I found it." Silas Vane died in a federal penitentiary 4 years later of pneumonia, a cold, lonely death, much like the one he had wished upon the boy in the river. Blackwood Creek did not burn down. In fact, it changed. With Vane gone, the fear dissipated. The trade routes opened. Clara's cabin was rebuilt, larger this time. It became a meeting place, a strange, beautiful house where English tea was served on buffalo hide rugs. 5 years after the fire, on a warm spring morning, Clara sat on the porch. She was watching 2 children play by the creek. One was Elu, now a tall, strong youth of 11, teaching his younger brother, a toddler with Clara's gray eyes and Maddow's dark hair, how to skip stones. Maddow came out of the house carrying 2 cups of coffee. The scar on his face had faded, softened by years of peace. He sat beside her, resting a hand on her knee. "The river is high today," he noted. "It is," Clara smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. She looked at the spot in the reeds where she had found Elu all those years ago. She thought about the cold. She thought about the hatred. And then she looked at the family that had grown from that single act of defiance. "It's a good day," Clara whispered. "It is," the chief agreed. "It is a good day to be alive." Silas Vane thought power came from fear. He thought strength came from a gun. But in the end, the cold that was in his heart consumed him. Clara Thorne proved that the most dangerous weapon in the West wasn't a Winchester rifle or a corrupt lawman. It was a mother's instinct to protect a child that wasn't hers. She didn't just save a boy from the river. She saved a bloodline, And in doing so, she found a love that rewrote history. If you believe that true strength is standing up for the weak, hit that like button. Share this story to remind the world that sometimes the biggest twists in history start with a single act of kindness. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the Wild West is full of secrets, and I've got plenty more to tell. I'll see you in the next one.